Hello and welcome to another episode of We Burn Blue. We're here with the season done, and what a season it was, eh, Sharon?
Yeah, I was thwarted at the end. I thought my pessimism would win, but you know what? All jokes aside, I love to be proved wrong when it comes to Chelsea. So I did say at the very first podcast that I'm quite a negative person, I think, when it comes to predicting Chelsea's games and stuff. So you know what? We'll take the wins, we'll take the dubs, and yeah, Champions League, here we come.
Champions League, here we come indeed. Well, to end the season, right? I think when we last spoke, we were just looking at the Forest and the Betis games, and you were saying we'd probably lose both. How do you think we did, considering we won both and the bare minimum expectation of Champions League was done, plus the Conference League win? How do you think we did in those games?
I mean, we did fantastically well, all things considered. Jackson coming in from the cold also, and putting in a decent performance, right? And the Forest game we were without Jackson, I believe. So to get the goal and shut them out, I think showed a different side of our game, which has been developing in this run-in, and I like the direction in which it's going because it shows that A, Maresca is adaptable, but B, it's in our DNA to be able to grind out results. This is the Chelsea I remember. And frankly speaking, as a fan, like as one of many, ultimately, right, we moan and groan about the style of play. But when we win, it really doesn't matter because we just want the 3 points. I think that's the Chelsea mentality.
Yeah, it is. It is a Chelsea mentality. I think we alluded to this when we talked about the women as well. We've missed the winning mentality, and I think these guys going in there and doing a job versus Forest, it was going to be important who scored the first goal. And at times we did look like it might slip away from us, but we got the goal. We were able to defend, and then Betis as well. I mean, a game of two halves. I think clear, gambles on Maresca's spot starting that game, but I think the halftime switch, bringing in Reece James, was enough to do the job. 4-1, solid win in the night, and yeah, I'm pretty pleased with it. I think going back, I think that was always my expectation that we'd get the top four finish, and I'm happy with how the season went. And I think overall, we're looking at the season this on this pod, and we have some key talking points that we want to go over. So where would you like to start?
Well, I mean, you've raised it twice now in terms of what expectations were and whether we've met them, right? So earlier you mentioned that the bare minimum expectation of Champions League was met. Uh, and you said that that was also your personal kind of expectation for the season. I mean, I would disagree. I wouldn't say that that was a bare minimum expectation because I get the feeling now with full hindsight, I don't think Maresca would have been sacked if we didn't make Champions League, if we just made the Europa League, right? But what are your thoughts on that? Do you think had we missed out on Champions League through the league, right? Would he have been sacked? Would that have been an underwhelming season to the board?
I think it would have been an underwhelming season for sure, but I don't think they were going to sack him unless it was like we missed out on Europe entirely and we were saying like the eighth or ninth spot, right? I think that would have been alarm bells ringing, and they would have been thinking about we need to find someone because he's not the man for the job. I still think that, you know, Champions League was a bare minimum expectation, at least one that was uh pretty among the fan base for sure, and maybe not, maybe the ownership and the sporting directors didn't come out and say it, but I'm sure there would have been some sort of understanding because of everything associated with the Champions League, right? So yeah, on a personal perspective as well, in this group I have, when we were like looking at where we, see Chelsea finishing and what the top eight would look like, I put Chelsea in top four. And I remember I was told it's a bit too optimistic. Maybe they're not going to get there, and we will just say, okay, we'll come back and see it at the end of the season. And fourth place is, I think it's a good spot for the squad, just because yes, Maresca is a new manager, but looking at where we finished last season and the potential of the squad, the progression from, top six to top four, at least the fourth spot seemed more manageable. And of course, we had that insane run where we were title challengers according to a lot in the media, and I think that was a bit unrealistic. But finishing in the fourth spot, securing Champions League, and obviously Conference League was one that the moment it was a competition where we were gonna be a club to have won all of the European competitions for the first time, we just had to win that. So that was an unset expectation. I think my only area in terms of just going back to expectations at the start of the season, I think given the size of the squad and the acknowledgement that we did have the Club World Cup coming up and there were going to be other cup runs, that we needed a much bigger squad than we originally would have thought about, as we had discussed going back then. I think I was expecting a cup run, at least a deeper cup run in one of the other two cups, and that was probably an area where I felt the club and Maresca didn't live up to, the billing. But overall, everything else, it tracks perfectly, and I think it's a good position to be in going into next season. What about you? Like, did you have any thoughts about this when the season was starting?
Of course, I mean, everybody has their own expectations, which is what you believe to be realistic, right? Or what you believe to be like ambitiously achievable, right? I didn't expect us to challenge for Champions League, let alone qualify. I had us maybe just getting into the Europa League spots. And I have a feeling that, again, I don't think this was a bare minimum expectation of Champions League set by the board. Like you said, the fans have their own view, and everybody's entitled to their opinion. And like you said, the potential is clearly there in the squad. And if they're not achieving and pushing each season right to new heights, what are we investing the money in the kids for, right? We should be putting in money for proven pedigree. But aside from that, I think going to bare minimum expectations from the board, I don't think Champions League was it. I think Europa League qualification, either through the Conference League or the league itself, would have been the bare minimum, right? Because bare minimum means if you don't achieve that, you're out the door. It doesn't matter how many months or days you've been in the job, right? Um, so yeah, I had those kind of expectations as well. Europa League qualification, it still would have sent like decent message that okay, we're going step by step. A higher league finish would have meant Champions League anyway, right? But a sixth place finish would have still been acceptable. So yeah, I think in the expectation area, for me we have exceeded. Okay, but you brought up another key sort of talking point, right? When it comes to reviewing the whole season, progression, right? There's a lot of potential in the squad, and you want to see that progress and that build year on year. Did we see that, or did you feel like, you've seen improvements?
I mean, holistically as a club, if you consider that we finished with a high points tally, definitely there is progression. But if we had to really get into the nitty-gritties, I think we'd have to look at it unit by unit and see how each unit performed to sort of analyze this. Let's maybe start with the goalkeepers, right? So we basically just had a rotation between Sanchez and Jorgensen for most of the season. And how do you think they did?
I think less said, the better. Definitely is the right way to sum it up. I think we need to be dipping our toes into the market for a new goalkeeper. Neither strike me with any confidence. I've always wondered this. Have you ever figured out why we just feel a little bit more safe or more composed with Jorgensen on the ball as opposed to Sanchez?
I don't know, man. I think it's just because Sanchez is just so prone to errors and he's made enough, errors that have led to goals that you just don't trust him. Every time he gets the ball, you're expecting him to just give it back or do something silly and lead to another goal conceded. And with Jorgensen, even though he might be playing versus lesser opposition, he seems a little more assured. Granted, it could be because the opposition is not as strong. And I mean, he is also prone to errors. I mean, we saw that as well. But somehow, I don't know, it just Sanchez maybe once bitten, twice shy. It's happened so many times. What do you think?
Yeah, so I mean that's kind of what I'm trying to say, but the cherry on top is that I wouldn't consider Sanchez as a developmental player, right? Jorgensen is a developmental player. I believe he's still pretty young. I don't have his age at the top of my head right now, but there's a reason also why I think Sanchez was trusted by Maresca, and it's probably to do with at least maturity, and the level at which he's played at for a longer time. But frankly speaking, I don't think that trust is totally justified. You know, like you said, Sanchez has probably made one too many errors for us to ever trust him, right? That's not something you want to be saying about your first choice goalkeeper. I mean, actually, you wouldn't want to say that about your second choice goalkeeper either, right? But fine, as fans and as squad builders, right? Um, you're saying, okay, we'll take a risk with the second choice keeper being a developmental option, but I'm not out here wanting to develop Sanchez as well and wait for him to get to his prime. You know, this club needs a prime goalkeeper, right? Who's not actually going to make any mistakes leading to goal, let alone one.
Yeah, fair enough. But then is the answer Petrovic? Because you said you want to go into the market. So does that mean you don't see Petrovic as the answer to this problem we have? And, obviously we're being linked with Mike Maignan at the time of recording. Do you think he is the answer to this?
You know, that's a fair point. So rather than say dipping our toes into the market, I think basically we have to look outside of the current squad. So whoever we finish the season with. Uh, there's also this young lad, Mike Penders, who seems to be extremely highly rated, although nowadays everybody's highly rated until they actually touch the ball. So it's 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 one of those things where I also don't really know how much is hype and how much is actual reality. What I do know is Mike Maignan kind of fits that mold of, well, touch wood, a consistent performer, plus a leader at the back, which would be a bonus. So at least for the sake of consistency, you go for a Mike Maignan. In terms of Petrovic, to be honest, I haven't seen much of his gameplay, if at all, from Strasbourg. And I have heard that, we are open to selling him, which I find ridiculous. But let's say we do in that worst case scenario, it better be because we're trying to find the money to bring a Maignan to the club.
Yeah, I mean, if we do sell Petrovic, then we're left with Sanchez, Jorgensen. I'm assuming we bring in another keeper. Penders is on the books as well. We have Slonina as well, somewhere in the squad. And then there's Eddie Beach, is it? Who's the other reserve keeper? So it's quite a bit of keepers in there as well. And I mean, either way, I think I would not be surprised to see the back of either Sanchez or Jorgensen. One of them I expect probably leaves on a permanent transfer. The other one gets a loan or sticks around as the backup keeper if we don't sign someone. But I know currently that yeah, there is a gap in valuation with Magnon apparently, and my personal preference would be keep Petrovic, keep Jorgensen, if we can sell Sanchez, move on from him. And, if we need to integrate a keeper, we can look at Penders or we send Penders off on a loan, like we did with Petrovic and then get some solid experience and challenge next season. I think that could be a way that it works. I don't think that we need to go out and get another keeper because even with a Magnon, right, like who's obviously the one that we're linked with right now, there are some concerns about, his style of play. I mean, yes, he is a leader and he has experience, but he has a glaring weakness when it comes to shot stopping on his right, apparently, and he's prone to some few injuries here and there. So you'd want someone who's gonna, solidly perform for you. And I think Petrovic has shown that at Strasbourg. So just for that, I think he deserves to start. But I think we've obviously discussed the goalkeeping at length. You want to move on to the defensive unit and how they performed?
I mean, at the risk of prolonging this discussion um, on the goalkeepers, yeah, before we move on, I just want to kind of think about the thought process that Mike Penders must have, right? Because he's very far away from first team appearances at any sort of level with the first team. And I'm thinking to myself, like, if he's so highly rated and if he backs himself, what's in it for him at this stage, you know? Like you said, maybe it's a loan to Strasbourg, and you're probably looking at maybe a 2 to 3 year loan. But don't forget, we are liable to buying another young goalkeeper in the next 1 or 2 seasons. So it's for me like we have to also stick to the track that we're laying out for these youngsters when we sign them, you know? Um, and when we're pitching the project to these players, they're definitely giving them a track to the first team, right? So I just spare a thought for somebody like Mike Penders who has to come into this shitstorm of a goalkeeping situation. Like you said, I think Petrovic has merited, right? On merit, has actually earned a spot or a chance. Um, and the Mike Maignan situation is interesting because his contract does come up at the end of next season. So this could be a kind of a Real Madrid kind of approach where you go into Mike Maignan and say, look, we're just going to wait until next season, give you one more season with Milan, and then you come over to us for free and we'll pay you a shit ton of money because we save on the transfer fee.
Yeah, they could do that. That would be another way of handling it smart from a business perspective, but we'll have to see, right? I wish we could be able to hear and, be a part of these decision-making processes when they're happening. To understand what these guys are thinking, because I feel like that would give us a huge insight into their plans. But onto
But
the
we don't
defense.
need to be there. We have Fabrizio for this stuff, man.
Fabrizio, shout out. To be fair, he's gone a bit rinse and repeat with his approach. I think there's Ornstein is the guy to watch.
I, I
Onto the
didn't I
defense.
didn't think Fabrizio would be catching strays on our podcast, bro. I'm very shocked at what you've just said. And we've definitely lost a listener or two as a result. So I guess yeah, we're now like Ornstein, Team Ornstein.
Team Ornstein and Team Athletic for me, bro.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether I'm wondering whether the board even like bother reading and listening to their stuff or anybody else's stuff. I feel like they would learn a thing or two. But anyway, moving on to the defenders, right? So these guys have been in front of Sanchez, kind of dealing with his crap the whole season. So the question popped into my head: how like how much of our defensive frailties, because I think we can both say it's fact that we are really, really not a good defending team still, even after sort of the season-ending performances. So how much of our defensive frailties come down, in your mind, to uh, poor goalkeeping and a lack of trust in the goalkeeper versus maybe poor defensive setup and execution?
Man, Sharon, you always give me all the difficult questions. I think, well, considering that some of our defensive frailties start with the goalkeeper, I'd say a lot of them. But yeah, there are clear I wouldn't go, well, I guess there are issues. There are flaws in the setup that are visible. And I think obviously you probably see things more analytically than I do. I'm only beginning to see these things a little bit more, but I think there are definite issues with the way the setup is, especially when you look at that, that right back position where when the right back is inverting into mid, and then sometimes, a ball gets played over the back and it's a crossfield ball we find that because of the way we're set up, the right back isn't always in place to defend that side of the box, and there's always a dangerous ball able to go in. So I think with that, I'd say it's a bit of both. Like I can't say it's not trust just because, like I said, a lot of them come down to the goalkeeper, but yeah, it's a systemic thing as well. You could also argue that the goalkeeper thing, having to play the ball long and risk losing the ball is down to Maresca as well. And actually, he has said this much, right? He had said that. So I guess it is down to the setup.
My student has finally become a master of the game because you have passed the test. And indeed, I think 99% of our defensive frailties or issues are stemming from the way we play. Um, and I think in recent games, you must have seen a correlation between um, us actually dropping off and sitting into a lower block and taking less risks from playing out of the back, and us keeping clean sheets for longer periods in games. I'm not saying like, okay, we've walked away with a load of clean sheets, but there are certain periods of games now where we're managing them better, right? And as a result, we're not conceding. So I think honestly, Maresca was the source of the problems during that very, very poor run of form in halfway through the season. But I also think he's turning a corner on this regard because if you look at the goalkeepers, the way he's asking them to play, it's obviously going to lead to a lot of risk taking and a lot of concession, possession concession in the wrong areas. And you mentioned this about playing the ball long, right? This is something that we've seen David Raya do and um, Edison do, Allison do. And, look at somebody like Edison, who you would think has the most shackles on him in terms of Guardiola will tell him to play in certain ways and execute certain balls. But the variety that he's actually able to, he's allowed to do, first of all, and he's able to execute on is incredible. And you see him playing that long ball to Haaland um, whenever they need an out and whenever they're being pressed into their own box. And you know who they did this against? They did it against us. And that's a ball that I don't think we utilize enough. And I guess that's something we'll have to wait and see next season as to whether Maresca is going to allow Petrovic or Sanchez or whoever it is to actually try that pass. I think we have been limited in that option. And occasionally we will try to go long to the flanks. Somebody like Sancho is not interested in winning the ball in the air. And Madueke's first touch in that regard is not great. Neto going in behind has seen some success, but I think, yeah, our style of play has definitely created some issues for us at the back that we would not normally have. And I also think it led to players like Gusto on the ball get a lot worse, and they look even worse defensively because, like you pointed out, they're out of position. What I will say is the introduction of Caicedo at that right back role, I think, is actually it's again changed the game for us. We look way more stable in possession, and defensively, Caicedo seems to be able to execute the kind of positional awareness to the same level as Augusto, who would invert into midfield. Um, Again, I think Maresca went through quite a long period of trying things out that were not working, and he persisted with it. And now we've seen the like a solution be implemented, and we have benefited as a result.
Okay, interesting. Interesting. I think you're right I mean, you're definitely right when you say that in recent games, he switched to sitting in a bit of a low block, and I think that was something that was quite evident that we had to do, right? We would have been able to protect probably at least 4 or 5 more points over the season had we chosen to do that at points, but obviously, like you said, it's him persisting with something that doesn't work. But then coming to your earlier point about progression, right? How do you think the players have performed individually? Is there anybody you want to specifically call out for improvement or the lack thereof and maybe regression?
Yeah, I feel like our defense was quite a mixed bag. And we might say this for the rest of the units as well, because you had somebody like Gusto who has basically tanked. I think this has been a waste of a season for him in many regards. And I think somebody like Cucurella is like diametrically opposed to that because he has just gone on to add more and more to his game. So where we've lost on one side, we've gained on the other. But we have to ask ourselves, is that trade-off worth it? I really don't think so. I think today we could have continued with the Palmer playing from the right wing, but kind of moving more into an inside forward role into the right half space, which is where he plays now. And Gusto can do that right wing duty. But anyway, this is the way the manager has decided to play his players, right? So we have to go with it. And on that assessment, yeah, I think Gusto's definitely had a poor season. I think we probably made the right call in loading out Disasi. Um, Cucurella probably the top player from the defense. I think we got a glimpse of James. I think that was a very, very good experiment for us to learn from. And I think James's best role for us is right centre back. It's nowhere else because it gives him the least amount of recovery running to do. And it still gets him in decent positions to cross the ball from. So I look forward to seeing more of that next season. The question comes up for me of is who plays in that central centre back role? I think we've got Tosin, we've got Chalobah, we've got Colwell, and we've got Badia Shield. I think we have to try and get Colwell into that central centre back spot because for me he had a not a stellar season but a good season overall. Like you could say there was definitely progression. I think the gaps in his game still need to be addressed, but let's say that this season I didn't gain any more faith in somebody like a Badia Shield or a Chalaba. And that's no discredit to either of them. They're just doing the things I expected them to do. And yeah, for me, Tosin is probably an adequate backup to Colwell as a passing centre back. But I think we need more athleticism, which I'm surprised to say this, but I don't think Tosin really adds that. I think he adds a lot of height. But yeah, on the athleticism side, I think Chalaba is a little bit more dynamic in that regard. Yeah, like I've been meaning to ask you this. Do you think it was the right thing to call Chalobah back from his loan?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think the way Disasi's season was going, despite him having, you know, I think he chipped in with a couple of at least one goal, and if I remember correctly, and he obviously had some big leadership qualities. I think had we kept him around, we might have probably been in a more perilous place because um, Tosin, like you said, he adds height. The most athletic of them, I think, is Fafana, and obviously he has an issue staying fit. And once you've lost Fafana and you can't rely on Tosin every week, you need someone who's going to really do a job. And Badishil and Disasi, for some reason, they it seems like even with Badiashile till now, like they're not able to consistently perform. They have some really great games and then some games where it's just like, what are you guys doing? And I think Chaloba probably has um less of that. So definitely it was a good move to bring him back. I think had we been relying on Disasi in that spot, we might have had, more of a disaster. Sorry for the very cheap wordplay, but it was just that. But yeah, and when you mentioned Reese, right? Like I think the right center back role is also great because obviously he has had major fitness issues, and credit to Maresca for, obviously managing his minutes very well. And I think we'll discuss more about how Maresca's handled the season, but this is something that needs to be mentioned because even when it was the Conference League final, it was Reece James was training alone, and it's like, yeah, we have a different training regime for him because he has to, we're trying to manage his minutes. So I think that has been something that's really good, and it has unlocked another aspect to Reece James' game because he's capable of playing the right center back role and even playing in that midfield role, but going up and down the wings, in a right back how he used to in his younger days, he probably has to face the fact that he doesn't have that in him right now. So this is a good transition where you're still able to keep your captain on the pitch and he's able to do a solid job. So I think that's great. When it comes to the other players, I mean, shout out to Achimpong as well for making his way into the first team squad. And if you really had to look at the defense unit, since we discussed this with the keepers, right? What are the sort of changes that you envision happening?
I mean, I was sitting here waiting to ask you the exact same question, but thank you very much of passing it to me first. Uh, in my head, next season, and this could be executed as soon as the Club World Cup, but again, this would just be my personal way of playing it. To get Reece James on the pitch, you let him invert into from right back to right centre back, and I actually, this is going to be quite controversial, right? But I actually play Colwill at right centre back so that he inverts into central centre back, and I play Badia Shield at left centre back. And I think that's mainly because we still need that passing angle from a left footer from somebody like Badia Shield on the left side. And I actually think that when I've seen him play, I feel like he's been building up his form bit by bit since his injury. And I think he's actually like, you know, a bit of both. He's a bit dynamic, he's quick, he's got that passing range, and he's got the height as well, which I think he's a little bit taller than Chaluba. Um, and then, I would definitely invert Cucurella into central midfield because I think his understanding of the game is like light years beyond the other fullbacks that we have. Not that we have that many. And actually, that little snide remark brings me on to the question I was going to ask you is what happens to somebody like Chaloba this summer? Like how do you see um, us dealing with a lot of players coming back from loan and then new signings being embedded into the squad? Like how do you see us handling all of that, and what does the defense look like after that?
Yeah, that's an interesting point because obviously we're in silly season and there's a lot of talk about players, as you can imagine, right? And a couple of names that have been coming up, of course, in regards to potential players that we might be interested in. So let's recap. We have Disasi on loan to come back. We have Vega on loan to come back. We have Chilwell on loan to come back, right? And obviously we have the surplus of players already we've talked about. And then we're being linked with the likes of Guehi, Branthwaite from Everton, and Hato, right? So that's three new players we're linked with. Obviously, we're not going to get three. We're probably going to get one if we're being honest. But in terms of then what happens to the players on our books, I think I would not be surprised if we do actually sell Chaloba. I think the fact that we let him go to Crystal Palace, obviously he came back and took it in his stride, but he's obviously going to be aware that he's not top of the priority for the club. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Chalobah gone. And I think Disasi leaves as well. Badiashile is an interesting one because you say he could play in the defense, and I see what you're saying in terms of his his positioning, playing him at left center back, and then him playing at that role, allowing Colwell to be unlocked. I get that, but at the same time, I don't know if he will stick around, and then also the likes of Fafana, even though he has a huge upside, just because of injuries, I would not be surprised if we cash in on him, right? So obviously, Guardian released an article where Steinberg talks about who all are potentially going to be up for selling, and Chaloba features on there. Fafana's issues at um, with injuries mean we're also going to listen to offers for him. Vega, of course, I think Vega is someone, honestly, I think he by pulling the whole stunt he did by, going to Juve, I think we're probably gonna have to see him go. And then Ben Chilwell should leave, Disasi should leave. So that leaves a slightly trimmer defensive back line. And yeah, your main question, Chaloba, I think he goes. Yeah.
See, my concern with that, what you've just said, is somebody like Chaloba is the only one we're actually going to realize value on, in my opinion. Probably going to be selling at a loss for most of these other players. Now, I like knowing how the PSR and accounting regulations work. Booking, like making a transfer over the summer means that we can book that entire revenue in this financial year, right? So it may look great on paper, but still, basically it was a meaningless transaction to bring in somebody like a Disasi. And of course, yeah, then you look at somebody like Fofana, and we're losing a lot of value there. Um, is there a concern also that we might be a bit threadbare at the back because the way you've played it out, it's sounding as if Cucurella is going to be probably the only like kind of left-footed option to play left back because Cole will be playing centre back for sure.
Yeah, I think that left back area is somewhere I'm surprised we haven't seen any concrete links. In fact, it's one of the areas I definitely thought we would have someone come in. So I still think something happens unless they're, trying to integrate like maybe Isha Samuel Smith from the academy. Um, but I
I
think if
think
you
that would be great to see some promotion from the under 21s, right? Just a quick question on Anselmino, and I think it's Mamadou Sarr. I mean, they're just we have an obsession with having at least one Sarr on the books, but
yeah.
um, basically those two guys are more right-sided, right?
Honestly, you see, I even forgot about those two. They're also there to come in. You're right. I mean, Ansamino is in and around already, right? So I think Mamadou Sarr, yes, he plays more on the right. So if you incorporate all these guys, then selling Chaloba, selling Disasi, listening to offers for maybe Fofana, one of Fofana, Badiashile, integrating one of these younger guys and bringing in someone who has more experience. And I'm just going by the fact that okay, I'm trusting the club scouts, even though they don't have a solid record. These guys could be hit or miss, but just going with the fact that they're identifying that one of these players is going to come in and supplement the team, I think we're looking pretty all right in defense, considering you're only ever going to start four at a time, right? Like even though we're assuming that he continues with the same formation, right? He's not setting up with a back five where he needs three center backs ever, right? He's always going to set up with four and invert. So, given that, I think we should be fine.
True, true. You raise a good point because Caicedo could end up starting at right back if Lavia's fitness continues to get built up the right way. Again, touch wood, that continues. I do think we're a different team with him involved. Last question on the defenders before we move on. So, what happens in this scenario to Malo Gusto?
I still think you keep Malo Gusto. I think yes, it was not a good season for him, but you do need, let's not forget again that there's Club World Cup now in a matter of 10 days. There's again we're gonna have four cups we're contending for. This time it's going to be Champions League, right? So you're going to need your quality players playing week in, week out, right? Which means more higher chances of injury. So you're going to need people who understand the system, who can play in the system and who are good. It's not that Gusto's a bad player. He's a good player. So um I think he sticks around, and if Maresca sees the issues and decides to use him differently. Where he has, I mean, obviously Gusto's even played at left wing at times in this season, right? So if he's able to, stick around and maybe provide cover in the likes of the early round of the FA Cup and the Carabao Cup, I think we keep him.
Yeah, but again, you got to spare a thought for Gusto, who I think at this point would probably rather go to Strasbourg and try his luck with Liam Rossignol to see if he can be turned into a flying wingback. In the same way he kind of turned Diego Moreira's trajectory with his career around. So yeah, I think the Malo Gusto and Trev Chalobah, these are kind of big questions hanging over that defense. If you've made it this far in, congratulations. But guess what? There's more. So it's not over yet. That wraps up part one. We'll see you in part two next week.